So let's start with the first chapter, which introduces database design. So before we move on to database design, let's understand table. Table is the most basic or the most heavily used artifact of the database. A table is also known as entity. A table is nothing but collection of records. Each record is also known as a row, or formally, row or record is known as tuple. So in the entity relationship model, which will be discussed in a moment, a table is nothing but an entity and individual rows are tuples. Now a record comprises of individual data items. So over here, employee ID is a data item, employee name is a data item, age and gender are data items. So the data items are known as columns or attributes. So since this is an employee entity, each individual row is an employee instance and each individual field mentioned over here are the attributes of that instance. Now table usually has a key or identity. Now the key is the distinguishing factor for the rows in a table. Two or more employees can have same employee name, same age and same gender. In that case, the key will be the distinguishing factor for the two rows. Now table or entity rarely exists in isolation. So table is usually related to another table. So an employee table can be related to a department table, a student can be related to a class, or an animal can be related to a cage. So basically a database is an interrelated collection of many different types of tables. And DBMS is a generalized software system for manipulating databases. So DBMS not only allows us to create these schemas or design our database, but it also provides a language that is SQL for accessing this database, as well as it provides facilities for security, crash recovery, data integrity, and much more. Also note that the key employee ID over here is a surrogate key. What do you mean by that? By surrogate, we mean that the key is not part of the overall information. It's just an auto-incrementing field. Now let's understand the key field in much more detail. Now your key or identity field can be a natural key or surrogate key. Now natural key is a field which is part of overall entity information. For example, social security number, which is a number assigned to every US citizen, is part of the overall employee information, or the roll number of a student is part of the overall student information. Whereas surrogate key is not intimate part of entity information. For example, over here, employee ID is not part of the overall employee information. It is just incremented as new rows or tuples are added. Now most of the databases provide facilities for generating the surrogate keys. For example, in MySQL, if you mark this field employee ID as auto increment, then as new rows or records are added, this field is incremented by 1. There are two popular models for data modeling. One is ER diagram and second one is UML diagram. Now ER diagram came around in 1970s and it was formulated by Peter Shen, and UML diagram came around in late 1990s. In the ER diagram, an entity is represented using a rectangle with the entity name mentioned in it. So in UML, an entity or a class is shown using a rectangle. As mentioned before, entities rarely exist in isolation. So the relationship between entities is represented using a diamond in ER diagram and is represented using a straight line in UML diagram. Now the attributes of the entity are shown using oblong or ellipsis. The key or identity of an entity is underlined. In the UML object-oriented world, the attributes are shown in a separate compartment, and the primary key is distinguished using a primary key stereotype. The stereotype has this symbols over here. So here I have shown a sample example of a ER diagram, and over here is a sample example of UML diagram. Do not worry about the symbols mentioned over here, we'll be discussing them in a moment. So the attributes are connected to the respective entities, and over here they are mentioned in separate compartments, and the relationship is shown using diamond in the ER diagram and it's shown using a straight line in UML diagram.